Boom. We are live, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very excited to bring one of my favorite friends and guests on the show today, Nicholas Merten of Data Dash, founder of one of the biggest crypto YouTube channels in the space and one of, I think, the calmest folk in there as well. Happy to have you on the show today. How are you doing today, Nick?
Tia, I'm doing well, man. Thanks. It's a privilege to be here.
Wild times. I have not had you on the show before. I'm sure all the Bear family knows who you are. Probably didn't need to introduce you so much. But what I would like to do is, what's your take right now on how the markets are doing? We'll start there, and then we'll get a bit more personal in the next few questions. What the hell's going on in the markets right now, Nick?
Yeah, man. Honestly, in cryptocurrency markets, there's a few things that I'd like to drill. I think the biggest thing right now is obviously we're just 18 days now from the point of us talking right here from the Halving event. And a lot of people usually, especially in the YouTube space and just crypto in general, always focus on timeframes that would be like the hourly time frame, the daily time frame. I'm focusing on the weekly and monthly, and I really focus on the longer term cycles. For me personally, I think we're getting some anticipation in the short term going to the Halving event. I think that it's very realistic that in the next few days we could see upwards of 8,000 towards 9,000 as a little bit of kind of a pre-rally into the or precursor rally into the Halving event. And then afterwards, we'll probably get some form of pullback in the short term. And in the long term, though, which is really where I'm focused, I think that this is really going to be the precursor that leads us to our next big price target. Mine is 100,000 by the end of November of 2022. That's been my general target. I know some people are expecting it in 2021. Some people have longer term timeframes. I try to hold a very moderate view on it. So I would say that's probably the biggest thing right now is understanding how the Halving event works. I just did a video talking about it. There's really a few key elements that I talked about, how the hash rate doesn't really affect Bitcoin's price that much. Another thing I talked about as well is how the Halving event can't be priced in already. And that has to do with the matter of inflows and outflows between the sell side pressure caused by miners on a day-to-day basis and the buy side pressure from investors, from hedge funds to everyday retail traders. So again, I'd recommend if there's anything people would go watch just to check that out for a little bit more of an in-depth conversation. But I think everything's going according to plan, man. We're right in line with where we should be on the stock to flow model. And then I think with the macro environment that you and I have been talking about one-on-one and stuff, like, I mean, man, there's incredible things going on that's just at this time shaping up for Bitcoin to really provide a hedge. The biggest element outside the Halving event, I think, is going to be what's happening in the banking sector, where you're seeing negative interest rates become a standard, possibly even in the United States. We saw some treasuries in the United States, the world reserve asset that people go to and usually look at for a fixed set of income that you can earn or a fixed rate of return that you can get in things like the Sharper ratio, now earning a negative yield for holding it. You're being penalized for holding debt of the US government. And the same goes for savings accounts. The average savings rate just dropped from 0.09% down to 0.07%. So what's to say that it won't flip negative soon when the Fed funds rate goes below zero? It's getting very scary. It's definitely the concerning thing that's been on my mind as of recent.
Yeah, I think a lot of people thought that Bitcoin would be a hedge versus the fall of the stock market, and they've been moving in unison. What worries me, and what's always worried me about my estimates in Bitcoin going towards something like $100,000, was the negative side effects on society as a whole to get to a point where Bitcoin might end up replacing, let's say, country to country deficit orders. Like, we want to order a bunch of X amount of X commodity, we're going to pay you with Bitcoin. Costa Rica to United States for lemons or some shit, like hundreds of millions of dollars in lemons, just as an artificial example. It's obviously probably never the case, but how do countries settle deficit together? It used to be done in bonds and these other forms. And I think for Bitcoin to really go into these 6 to potentially 7-figure marks is going to take countries to totally distrust one another. And we're at a point right now with the pandemic where countries are starting for the first time ever, borders are closed, like around the world. Countries ain't going to let you fly in or necessarily out. It's very difficult to travel. So this is, now that the other shoe has dropped, stuff we have been preparing for so long. Because and this is kind of an abstract question, so bear with me here. It's going to take some of your personal sentiment, and there's no defining order to how this question really plays out. It's just a personal question. what to what level of do you think the human species are going to evaluate what's valuable to them for Bitcoin to be put into a place where governments so severely distrust each other that the dollar isn't effectively worth nothing around the world, like the colones here in Costa Rica versus the US dollars. This could take a decade to me. Do you think is it just solely a value of perception? Like, can people afford food and water, or is there something like deep? Is there something deeper that goes on there that we're not aware of?
Yeah, I think that to summarize your question, Tio, I think it's a kind of dethroning of the dollar. And I'm again very conservative in my estimations for this compared to a lot of people. Some people think it's going to happen tomorrow or in the next few years. I think I agree with you in that case. It's probably going to take somewhere upwards of a decade for Bitcoin to even become, an asset that could challenge gold as the world store of value, that it could become the world reserve currency in a sense that people turn to. I don't think Bitcoin really works for all of us because right now in the United States, just take, for example, a look at the last few weeks and stuff. We had two steps here. We had the crisis where basically there was a liquidity crisis in the financial sector. Everything drops. Gold drops, hedges like gold and supposedly Bitcoin, which serves as a hedge as well. Both of those dropped. Equities dropped. Basically everything was going down at that time period because people needed dollars. And then we see the opposite reaction. Fed starts injecting record levels of quantitative easing. This last QE program, QE4, not even including the efforts that they did within repo markets, but in the last three major QE programs in response to 2008, we already have outpaced all three of those programs within a matter of the window of time that we're in right now. And we haven't even seen what probably will be the full total value, but we have well over $6.3 trillion that the Fed has injected. It's not including the $2 trillion plus that the federal government has put in. And then, of course, the fractional reserve ratios that banks are going to build upon in the sense of credit markets on top of that capital. So now that the money's back in, we've seen equities go up. We've seen a lot of different types of assets go up during this time period. We didn't really see Bitcoin, at least to the extent of what we need to see over the next few months. I think it's going to materialize over the next 2 years as Bitcoin matures as an asset, as we test towards $1 trillion market cap. I think all of those are very reasonable because you don't need to convince the whole world to get to that point. It doesn't have to be, as you were mentioning, Tio, it doesn't have to get to that point where governments are actually using Bitcoin as a replacement for bonds or certain types of securities or assets that they would utilize in kind of exchanges like that, or they would trade amongst one another. I think that comes well after the next halving event, well into the later part of 2020, where you start to see central banks have Bitcoin on their balance sheet. You start to see a lot of different entities starting to respect Bitcoin as an asset. I think it's still very much in its speculative kind of .com phase.
Yeah, I agree with you as well. I think the distrust needed to bring in a new system that everyone trusts is going to take a little bit. It's going to take a little bit longer. Um, so, with this kind of wait period, what other aspects? I mean, because this technology doesn't just rely to the blockchain areas. It's going to wipe out multiple verticals, obviously, in not just the financial sector. So now that we're seeing verticals almost being totally wiped out, that a lot of us probably couldn't have imagined without, like travel. What do you see anything? What's on your radar for what this kind of pandemic shapes into our future as more like digital nomads, and the way we do work in a global scale?
Absolutely, man. I think you really hit the nail on the head in the sense of like what it's going to do for remote work, and it's going to really build out. I think, you and I have kind of known about this topic of digital nomads for a while and stuff. I mean, I think I know so many people in the cryptocurrency space who this is their day-to-day life, but I think this is going to become the new modern reality for a lot of like Gen Z and millennials. I was in New York City actually in like March, right before things really went bad, and I luckily got home in time and kept quarantined. But when I was there, I was taking a taxi ride to an event I was going to meet people at, and the taxi driver brought up something very true. He said, I'm not the biggest genius in the room, but I know two things. A business does not want to pay for the office space for an employee to come work there. And along with that as well, if they don't have to. And along with that as well, they sure as hell don't want to pay the rent or the income needed to pay the rent of living in New York City. And
Hmm.
this is a very key point to drive home. Thinking in completely, business and dollar terms, no company wants to have to pay someone a New York City salary and pay for the real estate for them to go from their New York City home out to an office in New York City just to get work done that they could be doing from home at their computer. We're talking white collar jobs here, not blue collar. And that's the key thing here is I think, you and I have talked a lot about this too, this kind of seeing where systems can be decentralized, people can work remote, and people can be interconnected over the web and do exactly the same things they're doing as they would be in an office space and save a ton of money. And I think this is going to have a major hit on some of the major overvalued areas of like property markets, not only in the United States, but in Europe and Australia and Canada. It's going to hit a lot of regions across the world that have had these propped up valuations for asset markets, and they just can't sell it to anyone. That buy side pressure is, I think, going to dry up here with COVID-19. And remote work is going to become easily 10% of the economy here over the next, after we even, close out of COVID-19. I think remote work is going to become a standard for most Americans, and about 10 to 15% of Americans in this case. Not every American, but a lot of people who are currently working remote are going to probably stay in that position to some degree.
Yeah, I would suspect that you start to see countries. So in Costa Rica, we have maybe 600 cases. And because we've been using hydroxychloroquine properly, which is using it early on, and with zinc in our hospitals, our death rate here is around 0.5%, which is on par with what Korea has been getting with their studies as well. Anyways, something totally random.
That's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, there's ways around this. It's so crazy to see the politics that goes on in the United States from not being in the United States. Like, we're locked down here in Costa Rica, and there's so many people who try to answer it with this. It's like it's just happening in the United States. These other countries are not being affected by it. So I agree with you. I think we're going to see probably a lot more people in countries open up to long-term tourism, where it's like, hey, come down here, rent a house for like a year. We've got fast internet. You can grow a garden. You've got like a private well on the property. I think this is going to force the travel industry basically probably beyond its knees, and maybe into somewhat of a beheading, because the mass tourism days look like they're over for probably the next 5 to 10 years on a bare minimum, because I just don't see how we recover from it quickly without government bailouts or something. And anyways, I don't want to go too far down that road, because I don't think it's all that important. But in the structure of us starting to realize we need to work online, are you growing a garden as well? Like, are you starting to get, are you, how confident do you feel that the supply chain is going to be able to withstand countries like India and China not being able to produce things for the last 2 or 3 months? Do you think most Americans recognize the effect? And I maybe don't mean not to generalize so much Americans, but kind of the Western mindset, people even in the UK, to try to go back to normal. Do you think that they recognize how much of their day-to-day life has been operating off the backs of China and India?
Yeah, so I would say in the sense of like base necessities like food, I think the United States will be okay for a while. And that's only simply because we're benefiting in the sense that the vast majority of the United States, we have an abundance of fertile land compared to a lot of other countries. But I would say outside of that, yeah, the supply chain system is going to get very interesting over the next coming months. I mean, you try out, I think you know this, Utia, because you've done some like businesses where you manufacture goods or you work within the supply chain system. I mean, just imagine trying to like create bulk orders right now and fulfill demand at certain stores, and think like a few weeks out from now, like, is the economy going to be open or is it going to be shut down? Are we going to have a secondary closing? I mean, it already has had mass disruptions to the supply chain. On your question, the kind of funnier question of a garden, I'm definitely looking at doing one. I was one of the first things I started looking at doing when I heard about COVID-19. And I felt like I was a little too late to the party, because I know you usually want to kind of get the bed ready and stuff a little bit ahead of time. But I think you'd probably argue as well that it's never too late to start preparing for that, become more self-sufficient. And I think honestly, it's what we need right now. We need more time where like we're spending time at home with family, learning about the essentials, learning how to provide for ourselves. I don't think there's anything harmful in that. I mean, it doesn't mean you can't go out to the grocery store tomorrow and go buy stuff. It doesn't mean you can't go eat at a restaurant. But learning how to grow your own crops and stuff, I think that's a very awesome thing that's fulfilling for people. I think especially during this time where people are in a bit of a state of despair, I think, they feel a bit hopeless.
Yeah, there's something about getting your hands or feet in the dirt and watering the plants and seeing them get happier during that process. And I think yeah, that that reconsideration of what's valuable to everyone in their
Hmm.
lives. You know, a lot of the times I've looked back in my past and I look back at some of this such stupid shit I've done. But where I'm like, wait, I could have just been sitting out in the garden and enjoying the sunshine for years. I would have had to not think at all. And I think we've been making it a lot harder on ourselves to try to like prove a point, you know, whether it's in business or, you know, I've looked back at and some of the other people that have done really well, and their sentiments is like, well, you know, part of the reason why I've worked so hard is because I was insecure about like my place in the world and what I could provide the community. So we just started busting ass instead of when you stop and you look at the natural world around you, you're like, wow, this is fucking goddamn miracle. You know, the plants are such a I love watching plants grow. There's something so satisfying about that, and I think giving people this time to reconnect with nature, not just on the effect that you may need a garden in the future, it
Right.
might be recommended, but that relationship with what's deeply valuable to people. You know, you always hear people be like, oh, what's the intrinsic value of something? It's like, well, can you survive? Will your day be better? Because I can tell you the sun's intrinsic value versus gold is drastically different, or air or water versus Bitcoin. They're drastically different in how we would interpret the word intrinsic. So, and this bridges back to the first part, but do you think we need a shock in the system so abrupt that people are forced back to an even deeper realization of what value might be to them for us to overcome this properly? Or are you hoping that we get just like a halfway shock so people are just like a half wake up call?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think at the end of the day, I mean, it's sad. I really hate to wish for something that would be a dramatic shift, because it's going to lead to some short-term pain no matter what. Like, I mean, we're seeing that right now in regards to the economy and the way that we're living our lives. I'll be conservative though in saying that I think it's somewhere in the middle, as it tends to always be. I think what we're going to see is some major shifts in the way we live our lives for the next year, and a lot of it's going to stick around. I think, you know, one thing I can think, for example, going to that concept of remote work again, I bet you there will be companies out there that will literally offer you basically to cover most of your living related expenses to live in another city in this case, or will pay you a decent salary for you to live somewhere else where you can work entirely remote. And they're going to have a big emphasis again on rural areas that aren't expensive, that can provide decent internet connection. And from there, you're going to see a lot of people get much more used to, I think, especially in the US where you have so much land, you're going to have people that start to get away from the major cities. And as you mentioned, aren't going to care so much about being in the here and the now and stuff, the latest, greatest parts of the world and stuff where everything's going on, are really starting to take a little bit more of a slower approach. Um, I don't know, man. I think it really depends. It's so difficult to try to assume what's going to happen because you're dealing with so many different cultures and the ways of the world and stuff with all the different areas that we're thinking about. But you know, and the seismic changes that I think are going to happen, remote work is going to be big. I hope to see masks become a very common thing in the US. And you and I have talked about that a lot, even outside of COVID-19. That it should become a part of our fashion statement as a society and stuff. I think because of not only considering the seasonal flu in this case, but also just being able to reduce the spread of other airborne illnesses in this case, right? So
Yeah. Yeah, it blew. Once I realized that we didn't do that as a culture, it blew my mind. I'm like, wait a second. We would go into work sick and think like, yeah, like I'm going to work sick, and not realizing that I'm going to get maybe two other motherfuckers sick, and like, and then they're going to get more people sick. It's like, why the fuck do we just try to limit that? Put masks on, make it not. And there's so much stigma behind putting a mask on. You feel weird, people. But we need to drop that because we would have a healthier, more highly functioning society in general, because we would be getting sick less. There's just so many positives to that. I'm like, wow, we're so stupid sometimes. Like it's just like
you know,
right over our heads.
I can tell you, Tia, I went to the grocery store. I've been really trying to cut down any time I spend outside the house, but I needed to get some groceries the other day. And when I walked into the store, they not only were taking all the standard protocols, they were wiping down the shopping carts and doing all the basic things that so the store employees were doing all the standard procedures. But I looked around, and out of all the people in there were only about 2 people I saw that weren't wearing some form of face cover or mask. And it made me really happy to see that people were actually starting to take this seriously. That I think the stigma of seeing people do some form of face cover and stuff started to really go away. And I think, again, the regions of the world that have been so successful are countries that are following the principles from the masks for all movement, which is where People are wearing masks of some sort. Hopefully, some form of high tier face cover that can block out most pathogens. But even just making a homemade cotton mask and stuff, things like that are very beneficial. There you go, rocket for the podcast while we're on the topic.
No,
But
it's funny. I like these. You look like I put it on. I'm like, God damn, I look like Scorpion from Mortal Kombat or
yeah,
something.
exactly. I think it's honestly, that's one thing I don't get. I'm always different from a lot of people in this sense of like, I guess what I find fashionable and stuff, but I think it looks so great. Like there was this Slovakian president, for example, she wore it with her dress and she had it color matched and everything. And it looked great. Like honestly, on a style like perspective, it looked great. And again, it's that message I think that's so humbling and so unifying where it's like, basically at the end of the day, I'm not wearing this for me, I'm wearing it for you. I'm trying to stop any potential spread that I might have of the virus or any other kind of, airborne illness in this case that I could affect you with. And if we're both wearing it, it's that kind of dual compassion for one another. And I think, again, in this day and age, stuff like that, bit by bit, those are going to really put us in a much healthier mindset from really where we were even before COVID-19, if you think about it.
Yeah, I think they'll become big business statements too. That's a whole nother topic. Okay, last one, and this is one of my most. I think this is what I'm most excited about. Is that what's your thought? And I'm going to leave this as a very broken or broad question. Is what's your thoughts on the deflationary nature of technology in general, and what do you think the effects of deflation are in the long term, and how do we embrace the realization that things should inevitably become cost less or almost worthless to some degree? Does that make sense? Did I phrase that right?
Yeah. So in the sense of deflation, is it more on the pace of innovation or is it like on the price? So like technology will just become inevitably like excessively abundant and cheap.
Yeah. Well, so in my if I close my eyes and I try to imagine the future, I'm like, okay, we're on a path to a place where we can potentially produce almost an infinite amount of energy from where we are, like, or we have to constantly pay monthly for our electricity. What would happen if you didn't have to pay for your monthly electricity, if you could produce things quite like for one-time costs? What do you think the nature of deflation is? Because I think it's not, I think it's inherent in technology that as it gets better, it should be getting cheaper. I mean, we'll just leave it as a broad question because it's mostly I'm trying to ask these are all such like stoner questions.
No, man, it's a big questions. Yeah, no. I think honestly, so there's a few things I think you tackled on. Like this kind of age of abundance in this case, there's been the topic of like, a fourth industrial, like I don't know if you'd call it a second industrial revolution. But basically where we're going to this age where data is practically unlimited. You have, for example, energy. It's so cheap. We're seeing negative oil prices in California. There's certain peak times where during the day there's so much solar output that energy is negative in this case. So you're actually getting paid to consume it. It's like, what's going on here, right? We have such a sense of abundance right now and stuff. I think more than anything, it's about filling these gaps over the next few years where we're not tapping into this abundance. I think like, if you were to think right now, think about it this way, Tia, like in the United States, the biggest issue right now, why people are like protesting during COVID-19 is mainly because they're not getting their wages. They're not getting a salary right now. That is the only reason in this case. It's because they can't get money to buy the things they need. We have the resources, I think, in the system. People can go out and buy those things. They're obviously the shelves are stocked full of goods and services. But the problem is right now is that there's a few gaps like that. Getting money when you need it during this time, and being able to get the medical supplies that you need, right? Those are probably the two things that are on people's minds. If we were able to fix that flaw in the United States where people are having a difficulty of getting their money, you wouldn't have any outrage. People probably wouldn't be so eager to go back to work, whether that's essential or non-essential work. I think, again, this speaks to this kind of time period where we're at right now and stuff where technology is picking up so quickly. We're filling in a lot of these gaps. I know I'm working right now and trying to kind of scale out financial payments. And if we get to that point where we can fix a lot of those key areas where we still have a lot of inefficiency, dude, I think the world it's a very bright place. I mean, I think that sure, we're going to have a bump here with COVID-19, but I think the future looks very bright where a lot of people can live in a state of abundance. I mean, just the sheer level of automation that we have, I think people don't take that into perspective and just how much we've improved the standard of living over the last 10 years in the world.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think we're moving towards a bright future. We probably do have a bumpy 3 to 5 year digital cowboy novel, and then I think it's followed by like a fairly nice looking sci-fi novel for the 2030s and onwards. Well, we'll leave it at that. I know we're a little short on time. I'm really glad we got the chance to chat today, Nick. It's always a pleasure. Keep us updated with anything that's going on. I'm sure most of the Bear family probably already follows you, but if you guys haven't yet and you don't follow, go check out Data Dash on all of his Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. I'm sure you have all those. TikTok, maybe even too now. Who knows? Jesus Christ.
No, I haven't gotten to the point of a TikTok yet, but no, yeah, I really appreciate Tia, man. I've been a big fan of you over the last few years and stuff. I'm glad we got to meet back in Singapore back in November, all before all this craziness happened. So we made good timing.
Yeah, we got to have a face-to-face before it became a taboo. I look forward to when we can do it again soon. It's nice to see you, Nick. Pleasure. Give us those thumbs up. Leave all your thoughts, your comments down below. It's Tea with the Arcane Bear. Thank you guys for joining us today, and we'll see you again on the other side.